Just a few more moments. All right, B, you may begin whenever you'd like.
Thank you, Jesus. Welcome to the November 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Bylaws Committee. My name is B. Disman, and I am the chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez. As a reminder, New York State law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on and their first and last names displayed from the time the meeting is called in order until the time the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on and your name not properly displayed, you cannot count towards a quorum. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Before I go on, I just want to let everyone know it may take me a little longer. I'm working with one hand. I have a fracture in my left arm. So bear with me if it takes longer to turn the pages. Thanks. For this evening, Sandra Sherrod will be taking the minutes, and I thank him for doing it. And we will talk about minutes as one of the first items on our discussion today. At this point in time, I'd like to call on Jesus to take the roll call.
All right, thank you. Members of the committee, I will call your names one by one, and you will answer whether you will answer that you are present. At the end of this roll call, I will announce whether we have quorum. Pete Disman.
Present.
Thank you. All right, Adam Hartke. Has he arrived yet?
I don't see him.
Okay. Seema Shaw.
Present, and will be on camera in just a moment.
Thank you. Sandro Sherrod.
Present.
Thank you. Maura Wong.
Present.
Thank you. Mark Thompson is not able to be with us. And once Seema turns on her camera, we will have quorum with 4 out of 6 members present.
Great.
Okay, so I will presume that's going to happen in the next minute or two and move on with the agenda. So the agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. If there is no objections, we'll adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Jesus, do I see any hands?
I don't see any.
Okay, then the agenda is adopted as presented.
And let the record show Adam Hartke has signed on and is on camera.
Wonderful, thank you.
We have achieved quorum.
Thank you. Now, the minutes of the September 28th committee meeting was distributed ahead of time. If there is no objection, we will adopt these minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting these minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Again, we're going to see if there's any raised hands. I do not see any. Jesus, do you agree?
I don't see any either.
Okay, then the minutes from September 28th committee meeting are adopted and will be available on the CB6 website. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak unless granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you're having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. I will say I'm going to ask Jesus to assist me since I can't see all of you on my screen. Committee members are required by state open meeting law to have their Zoom cameras on and your first and last name displayed during tonight's entire meeting, from call to order to adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you are required to leave your camera on. Okay, we're going to deal with the agenda as adopted. And the first item on today's agenda is a review of the bylaw matters requiring further discussion and looking to compiling a summary for presentation. I assume that this meeting and the next meeting will have a document that we could present, with the new year. So I'm going to raise a question before I go to an issue that we need to go back to, that we had a discussion at our last meeting. So at our last meeting, we had a discussion about minutes, okay? And I think you all knew that one of the committee's chair had indicated that the committee did not of necessity need to do minutes. And I did raise this question with Carl because there had been a discussion by the executive committee about minute taking and what the nature of minutes should be. Carl came back and said that there really was no decision made at the executive committee. It was not an issue that was dealt with at this point in time. So the question really becomes whether or not we want to put something in the bylaws about minutes. And it is really difficult to be prescriptive, and we shouldn't be having operational principles in the bylaws. But I was thinking about how could we do this, that we have a uniform policy, from the committees, and you just don't have one committee doing X and one committee doing Y. And so a thought I had that I just want to pass by you is that minutes of committee meetings would be in a format prescribed by the executive committee or the executive officers of the board. If we could do something along the lines that there would be a prescribed format, that could be worked out, and that's how we would handle it. Any thoughts, or do you all feel we should just leave this issue alone and deal with it? The chair should deal with it as it comes up on committee members individually. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Okay, Adam, I see you walking, and give me your thoughts.
Maybe I think that's a great solution if we were to do anything. That's my only comment.
Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I
Does
think
anyone
it
object?
Open-ended enough that if the executive
I wanted to leave it more. That was exactly what I wanted to do, was leave it. I wanted to have a statement that minutes are going to be prescribed, not just by the chair of a committee, but there would be the executive committee making a decision. And if they decide not to make a decision, then you will have what we have currently. But I do think the format that we have, and if you do it in the correct manner of not writing a history book, but doing it very concise and to the point, you get there. And so that's my real concern that I had. But does anyone object to putting something in here as generic as I indicated, or do you feel we shouldn't deal with it?
I have a question, a clarifying question from an operational standpoint, because it's most likely the office is going to be dealing with this a lot. When you say the executive committee will, indicate what the format will be, does that mean that indication will come in the form of a resolution or one of these sort of quote unquote straw polls that have at times gotten us into a little bit of confusion in the past?
No, I think my preference would be, and I'd like to hear from everyone else, that would come in the form of resolution, just as the new members, put the whole resolution about the scheduling of meetings, that it would be presented to the executive committee and would come in the format of resolution that you then would present, from the executive committee to the board, and that would be the standard, that we would use. Otherwise, it has no value because people can sort of just decide to do what they want, and we make policy by resolution.
Sounds clear enough. And I would advise maybe as a starting point, the template that is now on the website for members to use. it's undergone some changes, but what the office has tried to do is really look to the open meetings law and look to the freedom and information law, because those are the two laws that really dictate what should be in minutes. They're not like crystal clear, but there is some clarity there. And while yes, it doesn't say that it needs to be the Gettysburg Address, there are certain specific things that need to be included in the minutes.
Sure.
And this latest version tries to reflect that.
Okay, so the only thing that I would say to everyone, go ahead, Sandra.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I would just, as a member of the body, I was just trying to caution us all rather, that we don't just rely on the bare minimum of what the law requires us to do, but, and try to make the minutes reflective of what's important to communicate to our membership and to the community at large. Not in any way am I advocating verbose long minutes, but I just want to say it should just not be the little bare minimum of these people were present, they discussed this, meeting adjourned. I think we want to communicate the actual tone of discussion. And I would say that maybe we think about the language, and I am in agreement of the language that the executive committee can adopt the format, but not think of it just for committees, but maybe say for all board minutes.
Okay. I don't know if there are any other requirements, so let me ask Sandra, you would know, and Jesus, are there different requirements for our monthly meetings, or are they all the same under freedom of information?
The law does not make a distinction between full board and committee. And just a FYI, Seema Shaw, committee member Seema Shaw, requests the floor.
Yes, I just saw her come up. So Seema.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time following the trail here in terms of what we're actually saying and we'll put into the bylaws. Is there a way for it to be stated a bit more clearly? Thank you.
Yeah, so I was actually playing with language, and I could play around more with the language, Seema, and send it to everyone. I was trying to resolve the issue that no chair of a committee is independent in deciding how the committee will record or not record the proceedings, okay? And we did have that take place recently. And in addition to that, the executive committee did talk about minutes, because people, as you can see, it is another job that a board member does and has to take the time to do. And it became a real question, did they want to take a stand on what the people should be doing? And so they had decided that this was not one of the issues that they wanted to deal with now. But in order to have consistency of process, you have to have all committees and all recordings of events done in a similar fashion. You can't have 7 committees and 3 do minutes and 4 do not. So it was a way, how could we do this in the bylaws that we acknowledge the fact that minutes are necessary, but the format for it would be determined through, we can actually say, executive committee and resolution to the board. And if it never occurs, it never occurs, but you have to have consistency. That's the issue I was raising, Seema. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah, now it's clearer. Thank you. So you're just saying let's have the executive committee plan in this kind of new normal to update their strategy around minutes through resolution.
Absolutely, and that would be presented to the board. So if you guys are okay, I'll play around with the language and send it around, and also determine where we would even put it.
B, just as an FYI, there are 2 hands raised in the audience. It looks like we've got 4 members of the board who are not on this committee, but are members of the board. 2 of them have their hands raised. Are you?
Okay, you could, I think this is such an important issue for all members of the board. Jesus, can you call on the 2 that have their hands?
The first hand that was raised was Ronnie White, board member Ronnie White. You now have the floor. Board member Ronnie White, can you unmute yourself and state your question or comment?
Yes, hi. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yes, and thank you so much, B, for your important work with this committee. And I'm thinking from complex documents, which I've usually have to write, there are times where a narrative paragraph or calling out a title page, just call out stuff as a narrative to help, characterize and format, the discussion or, what is desired as an outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And who's the second one?
Okay, the next person with their hand up is CB6 member Kevin O'Keefe. Kevin O'Keefe, you have the floor for your question or comment.
Thank you, Jesus, and I'll reflect what Ronnie was saying to B. Thank you for your amplification of this topic. I just wanted to clarify for the Environment and Parks Committee, we never advocated for no minutes, just that they be automated minutes. And actually more in the line of what Sandro said, where it's not just a skeleton of information, but more of an objective software generated transcript. And they are out there. More, corporate and government agencies are using the automated minutes. So I just wanted to clarify, first, thank you for giving so much time to this, but also I think we should look into how we can let technology lead us more into the future. Thank you for giving me the floor.
So Kevin, let me just say, by not describing a process, this gives us the opportunity to develop a process and then present it to the board. So I just want to ensure whatever process we have, that it's consistent through all of our minutes that we're taking. And I
think that's great.
I don't think I have anything different from you. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Adam, did I see your hand up or you're okay? You're good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to play with the language and distribute it and then see where it is. So you know what the intent is behind it. And if I don't achieve it, please come back and make corrections. I appreciate that. So the other area that we were working on, which I want to go back to, and we sort of left it incomplete, and it's going back to, and I'm going to ask Jesus if he could put up the draft copy of what we were working with. I want to go back to Article 3A, okay?
Would you like me to, or Sandro, or you typically are the scribe here?
It would be helpful if you did that since I'm doing the minutes.
Sure.
I could still make some notes here, but
sure.
hard for me to juggle the two. Thanks.
Yeah.
I've got it right here.
Yeah, and Sandra, you could certainly use the list that I sent you guys earlier too. That should help.
Yep.
Okay. So the reason I wanted to go back to 3A, I also had indicated that we would do some additional language that we would come back to. So I'm going to be working with 3A and 3B, and that's the election of officers. So we did go back and have a discussion at our last meeting that in September, we would appoint an election, we're changing the sequence. In September, we would appoint an election committee. We would have 2 weeks for nominations and then report to the board. The list of the candidates would be presented in October, and we'd have a November election. My question to all of you, when does the term start for the new people? Does it start December 1st, or does it start with the new calendar year of January? Any thoughts? I don't see any hands. Is everyone speechless? Sandra, because I see your smile.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, it's the holiday season, it's the end of the year, and there's obviously a need for some time for transition. So I would hope that it's not too compressed. maybe the first of the year makes sense there. I don't know.
Yeah. I looked at the first of the year because a lot of the boards seem to have their new, the boards that we looked at seem to have their new term starting in January. And I thought this would give people an opportunity to understand their role, get any background. 2 weeks in December is already gone with the holidays. So that's the reason for the proposal of January. Does anyone have any objection to January or any reason why it should be immediate in December?
Committee member Maura Wong requests the floor, or if she did, I think the hand went down. Maura, did you request the floor?
No, I was just going to concur that January makes sense to me as well.
Okay, thank you, Maura.
Mhm.
Okay, do I see any objection to January? Then we will put in this section that the new term would start in January. Does anyone have an objection? I can't see anyone.
I can't see any hands either.
Okay, so Jesus, are you going to add that the term begins in January?
Sure. Let me find precisely where it says that.
I think that's terms of office, Article 4, each officer of the board,
Beginning the following, all right.
of the following year.
Okay. So while you're doing that, we had 3 issues that we spoke about in dealing with the we also had an issue about a form. This was left unresolved. We had said in October there would be a form. Personally, I don't think that's necessary, given how we saw that people can speak when the nominations, at the night of the election. And I don't know if people still were interested in doing a form in October. That was something we spoke about, but we never came to closure. So any thoughts about the form of candidates in October, or just be silent and let the process be presented in October? November election takes office the beginning of the calendar year. Anyone want to talk about a form in October? Should we just discard that idea?
So this is like doing a candidate forum.
Yep. The candidate form can really be during the November election as well, but there was the whole discussion at the meeting. A lot of new people won't know, new people come on in April and May. They may not know a lot of the people. Do we want to have one day reserved as a candidate forum? And people could attend or not attend. That was the genesis behind the idea.
Sorry.
Yeah, Sandra.
I don't know if her hand is still up or not from before. I didn't see.
No, go, Sandra.
I don't know. I was just gonna say, I think that a forum is a good idea, but maybe suggestive language as opposed to a requirement here would be better. But I don't know how we would maybe encourage the elections committee to determine suitability of a forum. I'm not really sure how we would recommend it, other than say it must be held. So just that's my thought.
So, if you would hold that a second, I think I have a way of dealing with it. There were 3 other additions I was going to add. And what the addition that one of it was, because there was a lot of confusion about what the authority of the chair of the elections committee was or was not, okay? And so one of the proposals that I was going to suggest is under the proposal that says the chair of the elections committee is delegated decision authority to resolve issues not covered by the bylaws. So if you give the chair the ability to cover issues and you don't mention the form, If they decide that a form is appropriate, it could be handled or it could not be. I just felt we shouldn't be prescribing every issue that could possibly come up, when we do the elections, but make sure that the chair of the elections committee is delegated that authority. Having gone through the elections this year, I felt it was a little ragged in who had the authority to do things. So I don't know if anyone has any comments about that.
It looks like Committee Member Maura Wong requests the floor.
Okay, Maura.
Yeah, I think that delegating the authority to the chair is important to say. I like that idea. Before you brought that up, though, I was just curious about the timing of the forum. If we are nominating people who will be presented at the October meeting, that would also therefore mean that these people needed to be prepared to present something that same month. I think that's fine, but if there are names that come from the floor, those people may not have the same opportunity to prepare something in advance.
So Maura, you could do, looking at timing of what you're talking about, you could do, our meeting is generally the second Wednesday of the month. So if we say the November election, you could actually have a forum the first week in November. So that would cover all people who were nominated, if they so desired. And if that was the wish of the election committee. I don't know what your thoughts are about that idea.
So essentially requesting the board meet if they'd like to participate in this forum and hear from the candidates.
You would have a meeting of the candidates, and those members of the board that wish to participate can attend. I wouldn't make it compulsory as a meeting, but it would just be another opportunity to get to meet the candidates. It's like meet your candidate.
I think that's fine, but perhaps the next thing, which is just delegating the authority to the chair of the elections committee to make that decision, covers all bases.
Well, that's why I thought, that's why I said to Sandro, let me hold off on the forum and let me just do a delegation to the chair of the election committee to resolve issues not covered by the bylaws. And that gives a lot of flexibility to the chair of the election committee, which I think is the independent group of people covering the election, and that's none of them can run for office. So it really doesn't have any bias with it. Anyone else have any thoughts?
The only things I would say are two things. One, we may want to look into, or I guess I can look into, what open meetings law ramifications may be. So, because technically, whenever you gather enough members in a place to establish quorum, you have a public meeting. So I don't know if we might, in doing something like this, might run afoul of the open meetings law. Just sort of, if I were to think of every possible scenario. I do know that, I don't know whether all the other boards do anything similar to this. I do know at least on one occasion, one board has done something like this, but I don't know if they still do and if it was a longstanding practice for them. Second, me personally, I have and I'm speaking just for myself as a district manager, I worry about turning these sorts of elections too much into the kind of elections we see on TV. I mean, as far as the law is concerned, whether you guys are voting for chair or voting on a resolution, the law treats that as the state law treats that as the same thing. It's not a secret. It's not anything special. It's the board needs a chair, just like the board needs to pass resolutions. You need to vote on them, and that's that. And while I do think there can be some benefit in letting people know more about the people who are running to lead them, veering too much into elections in the style of what you see out in the real world, I worry about that.
So I was proposing not to say anything about the form, but to give the delegation to the chair of the election committee to resolve issues not covered. But I do think it's an important issue that we know, Jesus. If we decide, if the chair decided after, talking to the candidates or however they decided to hold a forum, we do need to know if it would be in conflict with the open meetings law and what the announcement would have to be. So I, as a recommendation, was going to say, don't put anything in the bylaws about forum, but let's give the delegation to the chair of the elections committee. And that means that issue could be looked at appropriate time as we're dealing with the next election, or do the research ahead of time.
Okay.
Any other comments? So can we include a statement to the effect, the chair of the elections committee is delegated decision authority to resolve issues not covered by the bylaws? You see a place for it? I can't see the print.
I'll put it in and then we can find a place for it a little later.
Okay.
The chair of the elections committee is delegated authority.
Decision-making authority.
Decision-making authority.
To resolve issues not covered by these bylaws.
To resolve.
Regarding elections.
Regarding elections, absolutely.
Resolve
Thank you.
issues regarding elections.
Right.
Not covered by these bylaws.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll figure out a place to put that later.
Yeah. And then there were two other issues that had come up on the election. And the more I think about it, I'm not too sure we want to put the process in. It worked well this year, but let me tell you the two other issues. One was nominations, when people nominate people other than themselves. People were nominated without being spoken to or agreeing to be nominated. And so we could include something that nominations other than themselves need consent of the candidate before submitted to the election committee. That was one issue that took place. And the second issue that took place was that if the president or chair of the board is contested, who presides over the election? And we did that this year. It was the first vice chair that took over. So I don't know if we need specificity, if this is just logical, or what do we do to handle it? Any thoughts on those two items? Those were the last two items that were left from our discussion.
It looks like we've got a question from the audience, but board member Kevin O'Keefe requests the floor.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin. What's your thoughts? Kevin?
Yes, it was not on B, thank you. It was not on this issue, so I don't want to, if you're keeping this discussion to the language that you're typing now, I don't need to weigh in. If I'm allowed to, above and beyond that, thank you for pointing out that the election committee members cannot be candidates. I did want to propose the consideration of the committee that in the future, if we have a candidate who is also deciding who the chair of that committee is, there may be a perception of conflict, and I think that should be something that should be addressed. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm going to park yours for a minute, and let me see if there are any comments about the need to be specific in those two items about nominations other than themselves, and then if the president is contested, the first vice chair presides. Anyone else? I see another hand up. I can't see who that is.
There is another question from the audience, board member Marty Barrett.
Okay. Hi, Marty. Any thoughts?
Oh, yeah.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Okay, there's been contested voting for the chair before, and that's, and again, when the chair is running, when the chair cannot perform his duties, such as when he's running, the vice chair just takes over. That's part of the duties of the vice chair is to sit in for the chair.
I agree with you, Sandra.
I was just going to say the only problem with that is that they're all elected at the same time. So potentially, although this didn't happen in recent memory, at least, the chair and the vice chairs could also be in contested elections that might skew the determination.
Whoever is the vice chair at the time, there would not be a new vice chair until January, as it wouldn't as the new term. And in the past, the term always started in January. I don't know what the confusion is now, or what the change is. I had my hand raised at that point in time.
No, the change is just put in the document that it will start in January since we moved the time of the election. So that's just an affirmation of that. But let me just say, I see where Sandra is going, because what happens if you have the slate of not just the chair, but the first vice chair, the second vice chair, that those be contested? Who runs the meeting? That becomes the problem that you wind up dealing with. We fortunately, we just dealt with one contested election. On my time on the board, I haven't seen contested elections going all the way down other than the chair. Sandra, I don't know, I'm gonna ask you.
I've seen others but not like a whole slate of contested.
It was
elections,
never the whole slate. No. Well, not in the last 32 years.
Okay, I'm glad it's 32 years. So I guess what we can do, I see Maura's hand up. Ahead,
We
Maura.
also have another hand from the audience.
Yeah, let me go to Maura and then
Yeah,
I'll go to the
Just
audience.
quickly, I'm wondering if the statement that we're adding, where we're giving the authority and decision-making to the chair of the elections committee, could this not be a decision that he or she could make if we were in that situation, so it's covered?
Well, I actually think even this year, during the discussion with the contested election, there was a discussion, as you know, with the first vice chair, that they would be taking over. So you're absolutely right. That is part of the discussion that could take place. But I want to make sure we covered it because of what we were dealing with. Okay, whose hand do you see, Jesus?
Board member Letty Simon requests the floor.
Okay, Letty?
Hi, I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to say that if I was on the elections committee this year, and I understand the issue. If we have a problem with the chair running for re-election or running for election again, and the two vice chairs, as we have this year, were also running for re-election or election again, that perhaps what we might do is go to the next best, might be the most present ex-chair who is not running and has no stake in it. If that's clear, or am I?
Like, you mean
So
like the
you're
immediate
clear.
past chair?
The past chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, well, we have several, so I would think that we would, like the immediate past or.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so that's it.
Okay, I see another hand up.
Yes, Marty Barrett requests the floor.
Marty?
Yeah, why not just have the chair of the nominations committee run elections, period? And that the whole process during that November date would be run by the chair of the nominations committee, who couldn't be running for office anyway. And there'd be no issue then insofar as who would be responsible.
So there's a proposal on the table to have, as part of the delegations, that the chair of the election committee would run the meeting. I have
Run the election.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
when I'm talking
yeah.
about this, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
election. I don't have a problem with that. It seems like a logical thing. It's running a meeting. Does anyone on the committee have a problem with that suggestion?
I might suggest that that language be clarified a little bit, because up until this year, I thought that is what happened. The chair of
Oh,
the
that's right.
ran
I
the
thought, but it
election.
isn't in the bylaws, Jesus.
Ah,
Yeah. So are we saying,
Sandra, did I lose you?
yeah, I'm sorry. Are we saying, I just, for the minutes, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what we're talking about. That the chair of the elections committee supervise the election in contested cases or in all cases?
Well, it would be in all cases. You could do that to make it simpler. You know, that's part of the duties of the chair of the election committee. You present the candidates, okay? You get nominations from the floor, you run the election. And so that's would be considered the chair's responsibility. I think that makes it simpler.
Okay.
Do you see a problem with that, Sandra?
No, not at all.
Okay. Jesus, do you see a problem with that?
not in theory, but again, I didn't necessarily see a problem with the process before this year. And it did seem, I hope I'm not being too indiscreet, but it did seem like there seemed to be concerns about even having the current chair even introduce the chair of the elections committee, for fear that it might appear bizarre somehow. And so we had to bring in the vice chair to introduce the elections committee chair. It seemed to overcomplicate things unnecessarily. And so that's why when we say, if we're going to actually put in the bylaws what has been happening these past years, that the elections committee chair will run the election, it might help to add.
Yeah, I would just put that exactly as you said it in the bylaws. It takes care of any issue as to who runs the election. Because these are the impartial people that are making the recommendations. I see one other hand up.
Letty.
Yes.
Letty?
I agree with that. Having been on the committee this year and been party to that problem, I totally agree with what you said. That's all.
Okay, thank you. So I then think, so if we could put that language in, Jesus, and we'll find the place.
Sure.
And so I'm going to recommend that the other two items the one additional item, because we took care of the first vice chair issue, that the thing that I said, nominations other than themselves need consent of candidates before submittal to the election committee. I don't think we need that in the bylaws. I think when the requests are made for nominations, that could be said, that if you're nominating someone else, please get the consent of the person to serve. I don't personally think that has to be in the bylaws unless anyone feels it should be. You see any hands up, Jesus?
No, I don't.
Okay. So this takes care of the issues that we had left.
Can you repeat that language about precisely how you want it to read? The chair of the elections committee will run all CB6 elections.
Guys, I just need to take this call 1 second.
Sure. Okay. Or will preside over.
Yeah,
CB6.
I think I use the term supervise. I think we want to just remember that the reality of an election might require like Airtable or some other technology to execute that they can or cannot do on their own. We might, so we might need staff or another person to assist counting the ballots if it's paper, whatever it is. So I would say supervise to ensure that they're managing the process as opposed to being responsible for counting the physical ballots necessarily.
All right.
Do we want to say anything like including but not covering these certain tasks? I'm not sure if that's clear, like saying
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm sorry.
including but not limited to running the portion of the meeting that has to do with elections, etc.
That's why I was suggesting preside, because that seems to suggest within the context of a formal meeting. But Mara spells it out a little bit more bluntly.
Yeah.
So I think it's both. Personally, it's presiding as well as supervising, because those are two different issues.
Yeah, I would agree that both are germane.
How
So I
about
think-
this? The chair of the elections committee will supervise all CB6 elections and preside over their administration.
That's fine.
But are we? They're presiding, not necessarily over the election only, but also perhaps over the meeting or other portions, right?
Preside
Well, they're
over-
presiding over all activities involved with the election.
Right. I mean, like if there's going to be a debate, a forum, whatever it is, I think they're presiding over that. So
Right, so they're presiding over all activities with the election, as well as supervising the process.
Okay. So,
And will
okay.
preside over, well, maybe let's get more specific then. Their administration will preside over election-related activities at CB6 meetings.
Yep, you could say that, and then we could look
Or
at the language.
during. They don't
During.
go- Yeah.
CB6 meetings, and the only hiccup I would envision is whether a forum counts as a CB6 meeting or not.
Well, that I think we're gonna do a separate research on, Jesus, and see about the open meetings law.
Yeah, I think there's a determination, on executive committee and personnel matters that kind of does address this. I don't have a chance to look it up right now, but I'm pretty sure there's some language around that we can reference.
Okay. So then I want to go back to the last item that Kevin mentioned. And Kevin, you had the issue of who the chair of the election committee was or is, and bias or prejudice. You want to comment a little more about that?
Yes, and can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is not about anybody in particular. I just wanted to point out, I just think a perception, if the chair of a community board is choosing the chair of the elections committee, and that chair of the community board is also a candidate. I have heard this from other members. There is a perception of conflict, emphasis on perception.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the chair of the
chair
elections
of
committee.
If a chair of a community board is selecting who the chair of the election committee is, and that chair of the community board is also a candidate in the election, there's a perception of conflict that he or she gets to choose who the election committee chair is.
I mean, I mean, this is, maybe I jump back a little bit in time here, strangely enough, but I feel like the committee is formed by the chair of the board, and then the committee normally meets and determines who will act as chair of the committee. It's not like a standing committee where a committee chair is appointed and members are assigned, but maybe I'm recalling.
So I think,
a
Sandra,
distant
you're
past.
recalling the old process.
Yeah,
Because certainly when I did this 2 years ago, I think time flies. When I did it 2 years ago, I was designated as chair of the election committee. I think the same way that this year's was done. I don't remember a process where you weren't designated. I mean, there is a way of putting members on the election committee and having them choose their chair. That's not a problem. but I only knew it with the chair of the board not
Mm.
naming the chair of the election committee. Does anyone know any different process?
Is it possible for the executive committee to come to consensus on the election committee?
Well, I actually think that makes it a much more complex process, Maura.
Yeah,
You
agree.
can have the chair of the board designate, who will be on the election committee, and they choose the chair. But Kevin, I can go to the same issue. If you are thinking, the perception, it could be that the chair of the board, by designating all the people, is the perception of bias of all the people. So I think, where do you draw the line on this? And
Right. One member had suggested to me that it's and I know this could possibly make it even more complex, that the board members decide the makeup of either the chair or the full election committee.
Oh,
That's not something
complexity.
that it's not kind of aligned with like a Robert's Rules of Order approach.
That's what I'm saying, but that's, that's probably won't fly, but I just, I think it's just worth to see if brighter minds than mine can see if there's an alternate way. And I believe you're right that the chair does choose the chair in the last couple of cases, at least.
Yeah. From my memory, that's exactly what has happened over the last couple of elections. So there's only one, there's two alternatives as far as I'm concerned. One is that it stays the way it is. Or the second is that the chair nominates members of the election committee and they determine who the chair is. So those are the two approaches, which would be simpler, not to make this so cumbersome that we can't do an efficient election. So may I see the thoughts of the committee members on this one and what your reaction is? So Adam, can I start with you? What's your thoughts?
I'm voting for keeping the same. Let's not overcomplicate it.
Okay. Seema, your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Okay. Maura, your thoughts?
I support keeping it the same.
Okay. Sandra?
Yeah, I'm in agreement, and I just saw the text. We did add the chair shall designate one member to chair the committee. I think when Rick was chairing this bylaws committee last. So yeah, I'm in support of it.
Okay, and I will join you. So we're going to leave the language as it is in that area. Okay. So I'm ready to move from this section to start the review, and we're not going to get through the whole review tonight, but I had the opportunity to go through all the things that we parked and a number of issues that we need to resolve. So I'd like to go to the working draft that we're dealing with. Okay, and I want to go back to 1A, okay, and ask what remained in 1A, which was the community board membership, and we were talking about conflict of interest and the duties of the city charter. So Jesus, I want to make sure that we add to 1A a link to the conflict of interest rules, as well as the city charter. So that when that changes, that's part of our bylaws and people can reference that. So is it possible for you to do those links?
I can put a note here to add them. I will be honest, I have always found it very difficult to find a clean link to the city charter because what you find just by a simple Google search, oftentimes it's an old charter. I found one ultimately, but it's not the cleanest of links. But we can.
I would 100% agree with Jesus. That one. I think it might be beneficial for us to try to get a clean version and put on our website and link to it that way, because the problem is if we link to like a do it structure that changes 6 months after the bylaws are printed or are published or set in stone in some format or another, then it's just going to be a broken link if we can't actually control that.
All right, so why don't we see what we could do, but if we can do something that links both, that everyone has it in one place, I think would be really important. So
Yeah.
that was something
Under like
left-
member resources kind of thing, I was thinking.
Right, yeah.
So the language is all members should consult the latest versions of the city charter and
Conflict of interest,
conflict of interest rules.
right.
Okay, maybe we just put that language in, and as far as the links, we can put them on the website and stuff like that, and that way we don't have to be worried about
Maintain
dead
it.
links in this
Okay.
important, in this
Yeah,
document.
that makes sense, as long as we have something that we're sending people to that. Okay. The next thing I want to come back to, which we said we would come back to, is 1B, okay? And this goes to the issue that we speak through resolutions, okay? And, we had the language there, if you look, Community Board 6 speaks to policy only through the exact wording of as an adopted resolution. Cover letters or other documents accompanying Community Board 6 may not add or imply additional language. When we were talking about that, we were dealing with the issue of what happens if a chair or a person in talking about a resolution comes up with additional language. Do we need any that's not in the resolution? Do we need anything additional that addresses this policy conflicts with the resolution? That we left because people were still concerned that someone may go beyond the resolution in stating their own opinions where they don't have the authority to so do. So this was a big issue when we started this discussion. Anyone have any thoughts on it, or is the language that we have here say that we speak through resolutions exactly as it is? Any thoughts?
I have a couple of quick thoughts more, I think you had.
Yeah, no, it's just quick. I'm wondering if we maybe say something about they may also speak in language that is in the spirit of the resolution or something along those lines.
So I don't know
Clearly
what
they
that
can't-
means. So I'm going to come back at you, having done a lot of communications. When you say in the spirit could be a boundary of 180 degrees and still be called in the spirit. So that's my problem when you go off script or off what the board policy is. Sandra, you as chair have been involved with this. Marty has been involved in it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I was going to say, I completely agree with things that were said. However, I don't know that this is the right place for that. So to your point, I think the intent of this particular item regarding having members make statements publicly was specifically to address the fact that we had members who did not agree with a stated board position or a position that had not been adopted as yet, but were also stating, I, as member or chair of committee or whatever, believe this, and we're getting reprinted in the press and kind of getting the imprimatur of the board convolutedly associated with their position. So that's what this intended to address specifically. But I think that there's another thing that needs addressing, as you just pointed out. The chair of a committee, when they are representing a resolution that was adopted by that committee, is representing the committee. They're, the titular head of that committee. It's fine for them to have their own opinions about it, but it would be inappropriate for them to convey those opinions as a committee's opinion when, for example, the resolution is before the board and we're discussing it. So I would argue that we should also add not a general member don't speak against, don't speak out of turn kind of thing, but something that reminds that the duty of a committee chair is to represent the committee before, when bringing a resolution before the board or other such matters. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. That's one recommendation. I see another hand up. Whose hand is up?
Marty.
Marty?
Marty,
Marty?
muted if you're speaking. And Seema has raised her hand.
Okay, there. We've tried to have people not say that they're on CB6. We've tried to limit who could speak in a public forum. It's been very difficult, if not impossible, and even putting it in the bylaws, unless there's some sort of slap on the wrist that the person can get. Forbidding people to indicate they're with CB6 or speaking in regards to CB6 when they're saying anything in the public domain might be the only thing that you actually can do. It and in that it hasn't worked.
Yeah, I know. It's the individual and being involved in the conversation. Seema, your thoughts?
I was just thinking, taking a step back, was this language, I think this was one of the ones that I had reviewed, like, back in the day at this point. And I'm curious because I think one of the things that I had raised was that we don't only talk in resolutions, we actually talk in a variety of other methods of communication. So we do emails, we do letters, we do, all this other stuff too. So I actually thought that the question was, should we broaden the language to say like official, I don't know, official CB6 language or official CB6 communication, something like that, as opposed to just limiting it to the resolutions. So that's what I remember, or I at least recall, like what my kind of points that I was trying to raise at that time.
So I think you're going to the point, Seema, that all communications, whether it be email or whatever, a letter, needs to be reflective of CB6 policy, which is through resolutions.
Well, no, because sometimes we I know for stuff on my committee, for example, with BASA, we do email and we say asking clarifying questions, whatever, all this stuff. It's not only our policy, we enforce state policy, we enforce there's lots of other stuff outside of just CB6 policy that we're enforcing.
Right, but right now what we're talking about is stating what CB6 policy is, okay? So we all ask questions. If you go to any committee meeting, you're asking questions as an individual member of the committee. But when you're enunciating the policy of CB6, it's the official policy by board, by resolution.
Well, I mean, I guess, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hamper. I just want to be very specific and very technical, because we sometimes say in BASA, for example, restaurants can't be 8 feet away from the curb. That's something that's a standard policy, just as an example. Or restaurants at least must maintain 8 feet from the curb. But that's not BASA, that's not CB6 policy. That's actually state policy that we, in our through our resolutions or through any communication with restaurants or whatever, will enforce and ensure that there's awareness around.
So Seema, I'm not even sure if early on we did not adopt a resolution that said we would be doing that.
Okay, yeah, I guess I don't know what's happened several decades ago, but in my time we haven't done something like that. Yeah. Go ahead.
The language that we have right now, I know it's not on the screen, but I think it does help address this. So maybe sharing it would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay,
Jesus.
if you could read it, because I cannot see it, okay?
So item D here says any member appearing before a governmental body or private body or otherwise making a public statement which conflicts in any respect with positions adopted by the board. So it's not necessarily just resolutions. I mean, it could be historical reference. I mean, it just says positions adopted by the board. So I would assume, since technically we should have been adopting things through resolutions, whether it was advocation for a law, an initiative, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we just have direct auspices over. I felt like this does address a little bit of that. Do you not think that's adequate, Seema, or do you think it needs a little tweaking?
I guess I would make it more specific. I mean, I know we were like, for me, I was looking at 1B as like a separate component than 1D, because 1B, B as in boy, says, we
Mhm.
speak to policy matters only through the exact wording of adopted
Right.
resolutions.
But so policy matters, right? I mean, I think, yes, the whole point of resolutions is when we're setting policy through something, as opposed to the straw polls or something else that you were hearing, right? So I feel like there is we obviously have debates and discussions around things, but it doesn't become the board policy necessarily.
See, I think
So-
policy is the very significant word there, Sandra.
I know, I feel like it's a critical qualifier there.
I
Any
guess,
other-
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead, Seema, go ahead.
well, sorry, just to say, I mean, policy, since we are an advisory board, right, we don't actually set legislative policy for the city, the state, anything like that. So as an advisory board, I just feel like we don't really do policy. And so I'm using it in like the broadest implication possible, which is like, we speak to like whatever statutes and, whatever we can uphold, we are speaking to that.
So I
So
view
that's
this
what-
narrower. I view it as when we say we support, let's say, a legislative proposal, that's our policy determination,
Yeah.
okay? I think this is meant to be different than where you're going. And I think in looking at the language, I think the language will cover it, what we deal. I think the key word here is policy, okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
if
I don't
everyone
see
feels that
policy
way,
being
that's
as
fine, yeah.
narrow as like adopted law, code, that sort of thing. I think policy is a broader term there, but maybe that's just my interpretation of the word.
Yeah. So I'd like to use, Sandra, thank you for reading the language. I think we have that covered. And I would suggest that we move on, and we'll come back when everyone has a chance. I want to just cover two other areas, and then we'll continue the rest of this at the next month. So we raised the question on 1DE, and I didn't know the numbering of where it was. Right now, I think it's the chair who administers the oath of office. We had a question, should we designate in the bylaws who administers the oath of office? Okay, that was a question we left for ourselves. Or is it just logical that the chair does that? And when we met in person, we had, the chair always did that from the podium. So does someone think that we need to put something more in there?
I don't think the chair has always done it. I remember elected officials would sometimes be called upon to do it. I did it once as a representative of the borough president's office before I came to work here as district manager. I mean, if ultimately the committee decides to designate a specific someone, that's fine. But in the past, it was sort of just, if the chair could do it, great. If they got an elected official that was present to do it, great. It was just sort of, it was more fluid.
Yeah. I think it worked well when we had like the borough president or a council member that appointed do it,
All right.
but doesn't always happen that way.
So then why don't we leave this vague? We have the oath of office and it will be administered. I don't know if we've done that yet this year through Zoom. Jesus, have we done that?
We have not done it since we have been on Zoom. It's a little,
I think we did it once, right? We did it once on Zoom, if I remember.
I don't think
correctly.
so. No.
That's a shame.
Okay. All right, so why don't we leave it as it is? Okay.
Samara has never taken an oath.
Yeah.
So she doesn't
So-
belong on the committee now.
Yeah. So let me go to the next one, which we started to talk about and we never really completed. So we talked about the parliamentarian, okay? And we talked about selected parliamentarian, but we're left with the question, is there a term and what's the qualifications? Okay. Can anyone just be chosen as parliamentarian? Are they parliamentarian forever? And what are their qualifications? And this was a hard one because how do you determine someone's qualifications? Do you require them, to take a course, show you that you've taken a course, use reference material? But the whole idea was to make sure that you could appoint a parliamentarian. Is it the term of office of the chair? Is it something that you could be on the board for 10 years and be the parliamentarian? I have never seen the issue of parliamentarian resolved well during my tenure. I know at some point Marty's was the parliamentarian, some other people were the parliamentarian. So I just wanted to end today's session with the issue of parliamentarian, that we have not put it to rest, or what the qualifications should be. So any thoughts? Jesus, do you see any hands?
Marty's hand is up.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, from the audience, Marty Barrett requests the floor.
Marty?
I think there should be a one-year term. This, that the board chair should appoint the parliamentarian, because it's somebody who the board chair trusts to know what Robert's rules and the charter says. And it should last the year, the same term as the board chair.
Okay. And anyone else have any thoughts?
If I can say something on this, I mean, the appointing a parliamentarian sounds like a good idea. The execution, I think, will be a little complicated. I do think that more or less the meetings that we have run smoothly, but we have gotten a little loosey-goosey, I think, on parliamentary procedure. And then we've got a small minority of members who have some experience in it, but it does seem like the sort of thing that everyone should be well versed in. It seems like the most straightforward solutions are, one, get everyone a copy of Robert's rules and be like, have at it. I'm holding the latest version of it in my hand right now. I don't think you can see it. There it is. But it's 700 plus pages long. And the other thing, the office has been working on it for some time, but it's just hard to find time to really finish it. But we can, if it's something the board would actually use, is pulling from Robert's rules the things that the board does very frequently, and that is the standard. And then have it, we can add on to it later for more obscure things that may come up. But if it's put in a document that's not 700 pages long, it might be, and make it available to everyone. Everyone can have it and everyone can use it. And then maybe one that may or may not obviate the need for a parliamentarian, or it would increase the pool of people that could potentially one day be that parliamentarian.
So I think that doesn't obviate the need for a parliamentarian. And I think my whole issue was how long the parliamentarian. And so the chair would be the person to appoint it. And I think the proposal that it be the same term as the chair makes sense. I think what Marty was saying, 1 year, 1 year term. If the chair is chair for 2 years, he can reappoint. I think we should specify, because we have had experiences, Jesus, when I've been there, that we've had 1 or 2 people be the parliamentarian for a decade. And I think we need to have more flexibility. I do agree with you. If you could get that document together, I think everyone should have a refresher on Robert's rules. It's really important. So we don't.
Lou did it.
Huh?
Lou did it. Lou prepared a short version that indicates, various motions and what can happen. And it was just like a couple of pages.
Could you
Um,
send it to us?
You send it to us or get it from Lou? Marty?
I'll ask Lou.
Yeah, ask Lou. I might be able to dig it up somewhere, but so I'm sure Lou would be able to find it more easily.
Yeah. Okay. Or we'll send Lou a note. Okay.
That's
Thank
a good
you,
idea, because it's there.
We'll send them a note. Anything that makes us the ability to be more efficient and effective is important. Okay.
So just
Sandra?
Chair Disman, sorry. I completely agree with Marty, but I added some language based on what we were talking, but yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, could you scroll down to F? So the last sentence, so I'll read the whole paragraph if need be, but I added some language to the very last sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll read the entirety. The original part was to decide all questions of order and to interpret and enforce Robert's Rules of Order as the parliamentary rules of the board, except as otherwise provided by the bylaws or any resolution of board. The chair should appoint a board member as parliamentarian to advise the chair on such matters for the term that coincides with the term of the chair. I got to work on language, but I think that's what I was hearing,
That's what we're
not just for
talking
a year, but for the term of the
Right.
chair. Okay.
Okay. So with that, anyone have any other comments about the parliamentarian? Okay. So what we're going to do is at our next meeting, we'll go through the rest of the items that we have, that we parked. I will write something on the minutes. I do want to say for the next meeting, there's 3 issues that we're going to talk about that we left in park, and I just want to clarify them for everyone. One is the question of whether a board officer can chair a standing committee. We parked that when we had the discussion. Right now, if you're a board officer, you cannot chair a standing committee, okay? 2 that we want to talk about is at the meeting that we spent time at, we thought at that meeting that perhaps there was no need for an assistant treasurer. And we were talking about the potential of eliminating that position. Having said that, when we saw this year that suddenly there wasn't an assistant treasurer and there wasn't a treasurer, and that we needed to have someone who had some knowledge of it as well as a treasurer. So I want us to come back to the issue of that. And the third that I wanted to come back that keeps coming up in discussion, and we did agree to keep the terms of offices as they are currently, but people on the board have raised, should we limit the terms? How should the terms again be effective? The need to get new people as officers. And I think if you look at this year, we certainly have new candidates who are stepping up into leadership. So our current procedures don't change it. But I'd like you guys to think about all of that for our next meeting. And then we'll go through the rest of it. If you have an opportunity, please look at Sandra's draft and Jesus' draft in case I've missed anything else. So is there any member of the committee have any other old or new business? Do you see anyone?
I see no one.
Okay. Then may I have a motion to adjourn? And I think this has been an amazing discussion. And for those that aren't on the committee, thanks for participating. We welcome all thoughts that you have. Have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Let's
you,
adjourn
Sima.
and we'll finish. We have 3 meaty issues to deal with at our next meeting. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.